Hey everyone, it is time for another recitation, this time on testing. Again. So, to kick us off here, we have the Web Testing 3 project. And our challenge is going to be to, um, to test an already made application. So we're not doing test-driven development here. We have something that works. What we want to do is codify how we're able to tell that it works into code so that we can run those tests. And if we ever wanted to change how the app is implemented, let's say I want to get my feet wet with class-based components again, I could do that, and my tests would tell me whether or not I was messing up. So I've done a little bit of housekeeping here in terms of dependencies. This project was set up a little while ago, and the testing library has moved since this project was set up. So originally we had these dependencies of Jest DOM and React testing library, which you can absolutely keep. I instead added the more modern versions, which is the @testing library / React and Jest DOM. And that's going to make our import statements a bit more consistent with the modern material you're going to find online and in documentations. But functionality-wise, I don't think we're going to hit any sharp corners there. So I'm going to go ahead and get my project started. And we're going to take a look at what we got today. Okay, so Jocelyn asked a question, what are the differences between Jest and React testing library? So React testing library is a set of tools that enable us to render and talk about a React component or a React DOM in isolation from it actually being presented in the browser. Jest is a testing framework. Jest is what allows us to describe the it blocks, the describe blocks. Jest is what defines expect. Jest is the actual tools that perform testing. So there's other frameworks like this, Mocha and others, but Jest is designed for us to write tests in. React testing library is a set of tools to allow us to describe our React components in a way that makes it easy for us to test inside of Jest. So the answer is, if you want to test a React application, you would use both. Jest is set up to allow us to write tests. React testing library gives us the tools to describe our React applications in ways that we can test with Jest. So that's the difference between those. And here is our application. And let me zoom in a little bit on here. And I'm going to hide myself in the recording. So if I were just given this, like I am now, and want to verify that it's working, I would click on Close Gate. I would see that this now marks as closed. Okay, cool. And if I open it, all right, it goes back to the way it was. I can't lock an open gate. This button is disabled. But I can lock a closed gate. And I can unlock it, and I can open it back up. All right. So what I just did is probably what all of you did when you first got this in your web browser, which is that you tested it manually. The goal is to turn the manual testing that you did in repeatable, codable tests. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. So a big sticking point yesterday was, where do we start? Where do we start? I like to start the simplest place I possibly can, where it's easiest for me to see results coming in. And that, if we read these three components, is going to be display. If we look at controls, we got some buttons going on here, and they do some things when they're clicked on. That's a little bit complicated. Our dashboard has got the state living inside of it, and a whole lot going inside of here. So I'm not going to start there either. I want my display, because my display is one of my very comfortable, very nice, dumb components. It takes in closed and locked as props. And if it's closed, we're going to display the string closed. If it's not closed, we're going to display the string open. If it's locked, we're going to display the string locked. And if it's unlocked, we're going to display the string unlocked. We also have some code to set some classes on it as well. Now notice how nice this prop destructuring is, because I didn't write this component, but I can still tell immediately upon inspection what props this component expects. That's so nice. That's so nice for me. So let's go ahead and write a test for this component. I'm going to go into my display directory, and we could either have a file called display.spec.js or display.test.js. This was already set up with specs. We have to do our imports. I'm going to import React from React so we can use JSX. I'm going to import our component from our current directory so that I can use it. And then I am also going to import render from my React testing library. And so this is all that React testing library does for us. It allows us to render our components and then search inside them with various methods.
Henry?
Yes.
Quick question on what's the difference between a .spec file and a .test file?
For our purposes, essentially none. So, just different naming conventions.
Henry, one other question.
Yeah.
The when you're importing render, yesterday I think we did it from testing library and then /React. Is that the same thing as React testing -library?
Yeah, so what I did here, actually thank you for catching this, this is the old import syntax. If you were just doing this project as downloaded, you would import from React testing library, but recently they changed. So this now matches the dependencies that I installed. So this is going to be @testing library /React. And this is the modern dependency. This is the dependency that's going to be receiving updates. So this is what you should be using when you add and also when you import. So
thank you
for catching that. All right. And I don't have to import Jest because Jest is already set up when I run these tests for me, so I don't have to manually import any Jest stuff. Okay, so now I write my tests. I'm going to write a describe block, and let's test display. And this is a string. I can put whatever I want in here. And then I give it a callback function, where it's going to run our tests. And then I'm going to define an individual test. Let's do renders without crashing. And all I'm going to do is render my display component and check and see if everything crashes. So I have on my right hand side of my screen a terminal already in my directory. I'm going to run yarn test, which is going to run the testing script defined in my package.json, which is going to hit up my display.spec.js, and I think I'm getting some warnings here because of version differences between React and the modern testing library. If those become an issue, I can fix that. I didn't see this when I had done my setup today, so apologize for not fixing that beforehand. But we have a test and it passes. We can render without crashing. So now what we want to do is we want to actually test the functionality of this component. And the idea here is it accepts two props, closed and locked. And depending on the values of these props, we're either going to display the string locked or unlocked, or closed or open. So that's exactly what I want to test here. So I can define a new test, which I'm going to copy and paste because I'm lazy. And I'm going to define our, let's call this, what do we want to start? Let's start with open and unlocked. So then I'm going to render display, but this time I'm going to give it props. Closed is going to be false, and locked is also going to be false. Because if both of these are false, then we're going to get the strings unlocked and open. Now I can save this into a variable and then do like display dot get by text. I'm gonna destructure here because that's just what I feel like doing. Both ways are absolutely fine. So we have a new test, we're rendering our component, and we're getting this get by text function to search within it for text. So I'm gonna do get by text, and I'm gonna search for the string unlocked. I'm gonna make that case insensitive, and we're gonna do the same thing for open. And our tests run, and they pass. Great. We should always try to break our test. So what if this instead said closed? Okay, so now we're getting an error here. There's a handy dandy chart in the React testing library docs that I'll try to dig up in a minute that shows all of the different query methods that it has. I'll just find that now. React testing library query. Here we go. And this shows all of the different like searching methods we can have. And there's a little table in here. It might actually be in the cheat sheet of the differences between these. Let's look up cheat sheet. Here we go. So there's a bunch of different types of queries we can do, and they're prefixed by get by, find by, query by, or get all by, find all, query all. And they do different things. Fundamentally, they're going to perform the same searching operation, but if they don't find it, get by and find by are going to throw errors. Find by is asynchronous. If they get more than one match, the not all versions are going to throw errors. If they do get one match, these are going to return the match. The alls are going to return an array. So yeah, so this is exactly, so query by, like if I do query by text, if it doesn't find a match, it returns null, which in and of itself causes no problems. Get by, if it does not find a match, throws an error, which will cause our test to fail. So when I'm searching for closed, I get this error in my test. If I change this to a query by text, we're going to see my test is now going to pass. Because query by test is fine with not finding things. It just returns null. So if I wanted to test this, I could use the expect block to be, what is it? To be truthy? Is that the method? We're going to find out. Yep. So now we're getting an error because this expect, when what is given and what we expect it to be do not match, that throws an error. And when an error is thrown, our test fails. So we expected the value of query by text to evaluate to a truthy value. It evaluates to null because we don't find a match, so now our test fails. If all we're doing is we want to throw an error if we don't find a match, well then get by text does that just fine on its own. So we don't need to be extra verbose here. This is just going to kick out the error and fail our test if it doesn't find what it needs to find, which, fine by me. So do we have any questions at this point? This should be open.
Yeah, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Just following on the difference between get by, find by, and query by.
Yes.
In this instance, like we're looking for exact text message that matches, and we probably want the error, so we want like get or find by.
Yeah.
What would be a scenario where query by would be more useful for what we would actually want to do?
So sometimes some people prefer to write the code in this way, but also you might not always expect text to show up depending on the way that your app works. You might want to find the absence of some text, in which case it's actually a little bit of work to write something in an expect that you expect to throw an error. So it might be better to, for example, check for closed and expect this to be falsy. And I need to actually redefine query by text. So now we can verify that closed does not appear in our document. So to be falsy is not a function. Well, we know it's going to return null. So, oh, I think I have to do not to be truthy. Or maybe falsy doesn't have an E in it. Either way, now I can verify that closed doesn't show up. If I were to put a get by text in here, it would throw an error, and you actually got to do some tricks to make that not fail your test. So those would be some uses for query by text, as well as stylistic choice.
Thank you. That
You're welcome.
actually answered a different question that
Okay.
I had. Perfect.
Awesome. All right, any other questions? I do see Jocelyn typing, so I'm just going to wait a minute here.
I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
So I used query by text and then open and not to be truthy. That actually gives error. So why is that doing that?
I would double check that you have this trailing I here, because this should explicitly work. If we query by text and we expect the result of this to be truthy, then this should pass. Yep, that passes. If you don't have this I here, then it will search for this lowercase open. It will be case sensitive, and this is going to make our test fail, because the text that shows up is actually a capital open. So you could do it like this, but one of the good things to do here, thank you, Jocelyn. To be falsy does not have the E at the end. So one of the good things to do here is try to mimic the user experience of this app. So when I go in my browser and I look here, it does not matter to me that this has capital letters in it. I'm just trying to look and get that visual information here. So we can discard the need to check whether it has capitals or not, if that's not super important to the way that our text functions. So I'm going to be doing all my searches with case and sensitivity. Does that answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, great. All right, anything else? Something I want to get better about is writing comments. I think a lot more emphasis could be placed on writing comments, because that's a sign of good quality code. And also it's going to be helpful when you look back at these projects. You know, we're going to do backend for a unit, and you're not going to be writing React applications every day. So when you're done with that, you're going to have to look back at this to refresh some of your React stuff. So at least be kind to your future self. And also, this is writing good comments is valuable job skills. Documentation is an invaluable skill in this industry. So write good docs, read good docs. Okay.
What would we be commenting actually?
So if I were to remove these comments, can you tell me what this test does? You would have to read and understand the lines of code. We would also have to decipher. For example, this isn't super hard. We're checking to see that unlocked is in here, but maybe you know, you just want to be able to visually parse this. Check for correct text. Check that incorrect text does not show up in document. So you don't need to comment everything you're doing, but whenever you have something that isn't like super cleanly expressed and it's going to take a minute to parse, or you want to understand why you made a certain choice here, that's a good time for a comment. So Jocelyn has kind of a maxim here, which is to not write comments very much, because if I write comments, that's a sign that I'm writing bad code. What do you think of this advice? I think that don't be too dogmatic either way. Don't comment everything you're doing. Like, don't be like render display component and get text searching functions. Because what you just did is describe this line here. This is not a valuable comment. This comment is valuable because why am I expecting closed not to be found in my document? Well, because it shouldn't be, right? That's not something that the intent behind this line of code isn't explicitly visible within its syntax. So intent is a good place to verify code. Jocelyn is right in that if you over comment, if you feel like you need comments to explain everything you're doing, then chances are there's maybe a simpler way to express this. Maybe you could use some intermediate variables that have good names, or split your thing up into functions that have good names, because variable and function names are also a form of documentation. And so that can alleviate the need for comments. I know Dan is partial to a style of whenever he writes a callback function, he will define it and then name it, because that's an immediate form of documentation. So instead of getting like .then res and like we keep chaining .thens, it'll be like .then get data, .then format data, .then. And so you get this form of documentation that doesn't require these verbose comments. I would never avoid adding clarification to something in order to make it appear higher quality, because if something needs clarification, then it needs clarification. And it's going to be bad code whether it has a comment or not. But a comment can help. It also might be a sign that you want to, rewrite and investigate a little bit. Yeah. So it's tough to find the time for it because, like, it just adds overhead. You're watching me type. It's not engaging. It doesn't help you solve the project. But adding comments is very valuable. And reading code bases with comments, just like reading code bases with tests, is going to make your experience as a developer so much better. So document. All right. Any other questions before we write the other sets of tests for this?
I think I'm missing some of the dependencies. What did you install initially?
So I installed, let me open up my package.json. I removed react-testing-library and JestDom, and I installed @testing-library/JestDom and @testing-library/react.
What's the command to remove?
If you're using yarn, it's yarn remove, and then the package name. If you're using npm, I believe it's npm uninstall.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I want those that you've got your
Yes.
cursor on right now.
The old ones will work too. You just have to change your import statements.
Do I want them as dev dependencies?
Yes. You don't. The tests aren't going to be shipping with the application, so they're just here while we're developing.
So, what is the purpose of the JestDom?
Yeah,
library?
I am going to talk about that, and we can do it right now. I was going to do it at the end, but we can do it right now. So one of the other important things to us visually is that when I click close gate, not only does this say closed, but it's turned red. Now, it's not absolutely vital that I test this behavior, but I can write tests for this kind of thing. If we look inside of our display component, we can see that we have code that applies these class names to it. If it's locked or closed, it's red LED, and if it's unlocked or open, it's going to be green LED. So we can check for these class names, and we can do this without JestDom. I can save this into unlock button and into open button, and now I can write test that's going to check for correct colors via CSS classes. So I can write an expect, and if we actually console log, let's do this because console logging is good. If we console log one of these components, we're going to see a ton of stuff going on. But there's some valuable things in here, information about this component, that if you just slowly read through here, you might see things like, oh, that's neat. One of the things that I'm not going to spend time trying to find is that it has a property called class name. And that is going to be the list of classes that are on that component. Which, did that actually console log here? Oh, these shouldn't be buttons. That's the next component. Let me fix those names real fast. But class name should also have showed up. It might have been an issue with the test runner. But it will give me that literal string of the class names on unlock. So what I can do is I can write a test for this. And I can expect this to match a string of my choosing. And I can use a regular expression here. So I want to check and see if it contains red LED. Or actually, this is going to be green LED, excuse me. And this test should pass. Yep. So what we're doing is we're expecting this string for unlock's class name, which is going to be equal to a string that has LED and then green LED in there. And I can change this to red, and we can get it to fail. Yeah, so we received, yeah, this is the string that we received. LED, green LED, and red LED doesn't match. The problem with my regular expression solution is that what if the CSS class on here was actually like red LED? Red LED would still match because we're just looking for a substring inside of there. You can fix this using some regular expression magic by checking for word boundaries. But what Jest DOM gives us is some stuff to extend expect. Because expect, again, that comes from Jest. Jest is just a general purpose Java testing framework. So it has the ability to check if strings match, if things are truthy or falsy, if objects are equal, if an array, has some properties. It doesn't know about the React DOM. So there's a library called Jest DOM, which I installed from testing library /Jest DOM, and we can import extend expect. And this gives us a whole bunch of things that we can, methods that we have on expect that will allow us to test properties of our DOM. So I have that pulled up here. This is just the documentation for Jest DOM, but now we get all these custom matchers, including toHave class. So I don't have to know anything about regular expressions. I can just check and see if it has these classes. So now that I have this imported, and this is a import with side effects, notice I don't save it into anything. When this code is run during the import, it will do all the things it needs to do to expect. So now instead of knowing about this class name prop, and I will fix this for posterity, for people that are interested. I can now just expect unlock to have class green LED. And this test will also pass because Jest DOM gives me the tools I need to inspect properties of these DOM elements instead of our normal JavaScript data structures. So you don't have to use Jest DOM, but it does make some things just a smidge easier. If you don't want to go out and learn regular expressions. So.
Hey Henry.
Yep.
Question. This might be silly. Is there a way that I can quote unquote mute these other .spec.js files? Because I'm getting my tests are failing because of those.
Yeah. What you can.
Files and stuff.
If you have like describe blocks in them, you can put this .skip on the describe, and then it will skip this entire block of tests. You can also, if you have a bunch of it tests in here that are causing problems, you can put a .only on here, and it'll only run this it. It won't run renders without crashing. I have done something purposefully here that is going to cause errors. So I may also help fix those errors in just a second. So.
Oh, nice.
All right. So now we want to write our next set of tests, and here's where I'm copying and pasting, and my developer senses should be telling me that copying and pasting is bad. Oh, I wanted to leave query by text in there. And that I should generally abstract this into a function. You could do that this way, but again, I don't want to spend too much time debugging my tests, so if my tests are straightforward, it's fine if my code is straightforward. I don't need to abstract too much logic for my testing. So I want to do the same thing, but now I'm going to check closed and unlocked. So I'm going to render my component again, except this time closed is going to be true. I'm going to leave out my query by text just to simplify these further tests. And I'm also going to not do the CSS testing for these ones. So what we're going to want to do is we want to check for unlocked, and we also want to check for closed. And I don't need to save these into variables anymore. This can just be a very simple test. All right, and we see that that passes now. That actually shouldn't have passed. Huh. One of the things is that as we re-render this component, we're going to keep adding new copies of it to the DOM. And the default behavior of React Testing Library might have actually changed with this. I don't know. But to be explicit about this, Jest the testing library, ignorant of React testing, has these cool functions called before each and after each and before all and so on that will allow us to run certain bits of code before and after each or all of our tests have run in a given file. So we can import this cleanup function from React Testing Library, and then I want after each one of my tests to run for us to run this cleanup function, which is going to make sure that the DOM is clear before we try to render a new version.
Henry, regarding this, the after each, where did you find out about these functions, and are they just defined in React?
No, these are from Jest. These are from Jest. This is part of the Jest testing library. So Jest is designed to allow us to write tests. This is part of Jest. We have here some documentation for Jest on these functions, and they're commonly used for doing things like initializing database or setting up side effects so that our tests are ready to run. Maybe we have some common variable between them that we want to redeclare before every test. I saw one student do their render in there, and I wouldn't actually recommend doing that, but you certainly could set up your environment in that way. So this is a part of Jest, and we can also put this inside a describe block, and now this will only apply to this describe block, and we can have other describe blocks that don't run this code, but very neat functions. So Jocelyn is getting an error about importing this. What you want to yarn add is at testing library / jest-dom. This extend expect is extra stuff on top. This is what we want to yarn add. Okay. So now I have this testing for closed and unlocked. I'm going to check for my final state of closed and locked. So I'm going to set locked to be true, and I'm going to look for the string locked. Now, here's where I can get into some funny business, because if I search for locked, but kept this with false, oh, I want to get into here, then my test is going to pass, because locked is going to be found within the string unlocked. One way to get around this is use some regular expression magic. So in regular expressions, we have different strings that represent different properties of our text. The up caret, shift 6, is the beginning of our text, and the $sign is the end of our text. So now I'm looking for exactly a piece of text that says locked and nothing else. So now my test is going to fail because that is not going to match unlocked. And if I change my prop for locked back to true, now my test will pass. So there we go. There's some fun regular expression bits. All right. Any questions?
So where did you change the lock to true? Was it on the prop?
This was, yes, for my props. If I set this locked to be false, then we'll see in our component this says unlocked. And our regular expression for locked will match this part of that text, and we won't get an error. What I want to do is make sure to not match it if there's any other text. I just want locked. And that's what the beginning of the line and the end of the line symbols allow me to do. Yeah, so Jocelyn, now that you have installed testing library / Jest, you do need to import the extend expect off of it. And the instructions for that should also be in the GitHub that I linked a bit earlier. Okay. Any questions with testing this component before we move on?
Why wouldn't you want to just test the props one by one in this case to like isolate exactly what the, like if a get by text failed, like exactly which one it was?
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. I didn't because we're generally going to be using these in pairs, and it honestly just didn't occur to me. But yeah, we could test them all individually. One of the things that we know when we're using this is that we're generally going to use these in pairs. We also don't test the default behavior of what happens when we don't give these props. It's going to be false for both of them, so it is going to be open and unlocked. There's lots of stuff that we can test here. We're also not testing open and locked because that physically does not make sense for our door, and our application should never get in that state. And so this is where we come to the point where it's like there's an infinite amount of things to test, and it's difficult to decide what's going to be valuable to test. So I'm choosing here to kind of test how I'm going to use it because my application is pretty limited in scope, and I know exactly how it's going to be used, and I don't have to handle any edge cases. But Lily brings up a good point. What happens if we do these in isolation? So it is important to think about your tests and how they might be used within your application, or how the components that you're testing might be used within your application. So, all right.
Yeah, another question. In the default project that we downloaded for this project, they're using Enzyme and a method called shallow. Is that just basically the Enzyme version of what we're doing here?
I've honestly never used Enzyme. For this project, I believe, unless I cloned it early, the default was set up with React Testing Library. I don't remember seeing any Enzyme stuff in here, but Enzyme is... I must
have cloned the wrong one.
Okay, that's possible. Enzyme is an alternative to React Testing Library. It's something that allows us to inspect our React elements in ways that allow us to test them. It's not a replacement for Jest. It's a replacement for React Testing Library. And they have different testing philosophies. Enzyme allows you to care much more about what's going on inside your components, whereas React Testing Library is much more focused on what's our user experience. Like, notice that I'm not using query selectors to get these. I'm just looking for text. Because our user doesn't care what, like, class or div or whatever this is. They're looking for where it says unlocked and closed. And if we look at our cheat sheet of queries, we also have, like, label text, placeholder text, but also like alt text, and you can also get by like the ARIA labels, and this is how our user might navigate via keyboard or using some other accessibility option. And so that allows us to test much more the way our user is interacting with the website, which is one of many testing philosophies. So if you have the time, learn Enzyme 2. It's always good to get more perspective on these because it will let you write better tests when you are more familiar with how this stuff works. Okay, so any final questions before we go and try to test the controls component? Okay. So let's move on.
One thing. The skip and only, is it dot skip and it dot only?
Yep. You can do these on the describe as well.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. And those, if you Google Jest skip, it's part of the Jest library. Recommend you all read the Jest documentation. Whenever we're using this stuff, if you have time, like, just read the whole documentation. You're going to learn a lot of stuff. You're also going to not understand a lot of stuff. But then when you see it later, you're going to be like, aha, I've seen this. I don't know what it is, but I now know what to Google. So read docs. Okay. So let's test the controls component, because this is a little bit more complicated. And I've gotten feedback that one of the things I do is I move around the files very quickly, and it can be hard to track. If you haven't noticed, right here below each one of these panes is the file name and path of where I am, and it kind of fades out as I switch between them. I'm still trying to think of a solution to make that a bit more readable, because I do know I flip around pretty fast. So we're going to open up our controls and our controls.spec.js. And I am honestly tempted to copy and paste the testing imports that I did, but it's really good to just try to get the muscle memory of typing these, because it's part of the way that you learn. It's part of the reason I'm not a fan of snippet libraries until you're absolutely bored with doing this and you have no questions about what you need to import. So importing render and cleanup from React, or at testing library /React, import our component. I'm going to do an after each and cleanup, and then a describe block for controls, and then an it test renders without crashing, our old standby, and we're going to render our controls component with no props. Which often, to get it to render without crashing, you will need to give it props. We just don't have to here. Okay. Oh. Imported the wrong thing. Alright, let's see if our test passes. Alright, ooh. Where's my test failing? Oh, it looks like I forgot to save the previous file. So let me go into my display testing file. And this locked needs to be true. Okay, so now all my tests should pass. Alright, great. So I got passing tests, and now I'm ready to test this component, but first I need to understand how it works. So again, look at how nice prop destructuring is, because I can see immediately at the top here what props this uses, and I don't have to dig through the code and find everywhere I say props. I can just see right here. That's nice. It's nice for me. So expect a lot of props here. Locked and closed, just like the display component, but then also these functions toggle lock and toggle closed. And these are given as on clicks for our buttons, which are going to be these buttons right here. So when we click on these, it's going to run these callback functions. And we also control this disabled attribute. So notice how when we're locked, this open gate button has grayed out, and you can hear me clicking on it and nothing is happening. It's because the button is disabled. And that's an attribute that comes from our standard HTML and CSS. We can see that this button literally has a property called disabled. And when it has that property, then it will be grayed out like this, whereas this button does not have a property called disabled, so we're able to click it. So the way we have our disabled sets is with our Boolean values. They're on the opposite elements. So for example, if our gate is not closed or otherwise opened, then we can't mess with locking or unlocking. Right? If the gate's open, then we're throwing a dead bolt into nothing, so that doesn't matter. And when the gate is locked, then we cannot open the gate or close the gate. So we're using these opposite Boolean values here, and we can see this happening in real time. We start unlocked and open, we can't lock and open gate, we close the gate, they both work. If we lock the gate, we can't open the gate. So that's what our disabled prop is doing. Alright, so now I want to start testing this behavior. So what I'm going to do is test the various states that we had, open and unlocked, closed and unlocked, and closed and locked. And I'm going to check and see if the buttons are disabled or enabled, and if I can click on them. So let's do that. So let's test open and unlocked, because that is just where I like to start. And we're going to get our getByText function. And we're going to get this from our render of our controls. And I'm going to start by just giving it locked as false and also closed as false. And we'll worry about those callback functions in just a minute. So now I can get my close button with my getByText, and I'm going to search for closed and switch close to lock here. And these strings should actually be close gate and lock gate. Alright, so let's check and see if our tests are passing. Great. Oh, nope. Oh, this should be close gate instead of closed gate. Thank you, tests, for telling me when I'm wrong. I appreciate that. Okay, so now I want to check the disabled properties on these, because close gate shouldn't be disabled and lock gate should. And I can do that using my vanilla, my normal testing patterns. I can do close button dot disabled, just like we did with the class names, and I can check to see if this is, I guess, to be truthy is the preferred way of doing this. Or I guess this should be to be falsy, because close gate should not be disabled, but the lock button should be disabled, so its disabled property should be truthy. So let's see if these tests pass. Whoop. Lock button dot disabled is not passing. Oh, to be truthy is not a function. It's because I said to be toothy. Thank you, tests, for telling me I'm wrong. Okay, so those pass. We can also do this with the Jest DOM library. Where did I have my tab? It has a to be disabled matcher. So we don't have to be aware of the fact that we can do this. This will just kind of make it a bit more clear what's happening. Again, we use our function names as documentation. I'm just going to leave it this way for now, because you can do it both ways. Okay, so now I want to test and see that these buttons work when they're clicked on. And I'm not going to be checking to see if this does anything with state, because controls is a dumb component, right? It receives everything it needs via prompts and it gives us back JSX. It's purely presentational. So all that's happening when I click on the close gate button is that it runs the toggle closed function. That's its on click. This is where we can use our spies. So I can make my close spy, and this is going to be equal to jest.fn. This is going to create a spy function for us, and this is a part of Jest. This is our generalized testing library. And then I'm going to do the same thing for my lock spy, and this is going to be equal to a different jest.fn. So now let's spread these out a little bit, and we can use blocks of comments here to also add clarity, like as we're reading this, in the same way that text broken up into paragraphs is more clear than like a giant sentence. You know, checking button disabled status. So this isn't a super valuable comment, but it can also help, just guide our eyes in terms of what these blocks of code are doing. Checking button clicked events. So I'm going to import fire event from React Testing Library, because that is going to let us click on our DOM elements. Again, Jest doesn't know what a DOM element is. All that stuff comes from React Testing Library. So I'm going to fire an event. It's going to be a click event, and this is going to be on my close button. And then I expect my close spy to be called. And this is a built-in thing that Jest has for its spy functions. Okay. And this didn't work because I never added the props to my render. So I want to add for my toggle closed, my close spy, and for my toggle locked, that is going to be my lock spy, not the lick spy. All right, and there we go, our test pass. When I click on my close button, it's going to run my spy function, which I don't care what it does, but just allows me to check and see if it's been called, how many times it's been called, what arguments it was given, a lot of very cool stuff. And I can also check that when I click on my lock button, that the lock spy is going to be not called.
Okay, so Henry, I have some questions about the mock function.
Mm-hmm.
So are we not supposed to test the real function?
So in terms of the controls component, there is no such thing as the real function. There's just what it was given as props. The controls function is explicitly unaware of what toggle lock and toggle closed do. It receives them via props, and it sets them as on clicks on this button. So any function for controls is the correct function. Now, what I believe you're actually referring to is the functions that we've written inside of our dashboard. Our toggle locked functions actually trigger state changes, which is going to make our application work. And we are going to test these in the sense that we're going to test what happens when we render the dashboard and then click on the buttons that show up in there. And that should cause state and text to change, and that's really the more valuable test. Like Dustin said yesterday, write tests, not too many, mostly integration. Testing dashboard is an integration test because we're testing the state within dashboard, but also that our subcomponents, controls, and display that are working. Because if they fail, our dashboard tests have failed. Now, it's still valuable to have some unit tests, which is when we test these components in isolation, because it's going to give us a bit more information about how they failed than necessarily digging through our integration tests. But we're not going to actually test this toggle locked function directly. We're just going to check the effects of it match what our user expects to see when they click on the button. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I'm having a little bit of trouble with my test because I'm having this disconnect with the functions and mock functions, because I'm importing functions into my test, and I'm rendering it as a prop on my component.
Yeah, so
render it. Yeah, go ahead.
We're not going to be importing, like I cannot import toggle locked. I can't import it because it's inside of my component. I can only import and export from the global scope. And the goal with React Testing Library is that we should be unconcerned with the implementation details inside of our components. we want to check that they match our user experience. So what is the user experience of the controls component in isolation? When we click the button, it does what the button's supposed to do. What is the button supposed to do? Controls does not care. When we test display, we're going to do essentially the same thing that we've done here. We'll render display. It won't take any props. We'll find our buttons. We'll click on them, but we won't be checking to see if any function was called. I'll be checking to see if now our gate is closed. That's the kind of test that I'm going to write for my display, is I'm going to check and see if the consequences of these button click matches the user experience. So, did that help, Amir?
Yeah, it did help. Yeah, I believe it did help. Yeah,
okay.
But I have another scenario that kind of like, it's not using a React component, it's just using a function.
Okay.
And I'm just trying to set up a mock. I mean, maybe at the end if we can take a look at that.
Yeah. So if you want to mock a dependency, you can do that with Jest mocking, which I believe is in the training kit as well, but is also in the Jest documentation. You can also write your own function in here, like a spy or just any function you want, and pass that via props and check and see if it's being called in the ways that you're expecting. But you can mock entire modules and files as well. You just import them using jest.mock instead of with the import syntax. And you'll also be able to set up a directory next to the file called dunder _mocks and then make a file in there that contains the mocked function. If you just want to use the function, you should be able to import it and use it however you please. But if you want to change the functionality of that specific function, you would do it with this import mocking. Okay. So I want to keep going here because we have this one set of tests for open and unlocked, and we would just go in here and we would check the other cases. So closed and unlocked. I'll keep my close and lock spy. I want to get closed should be true. So our close button should actually have the text open gate, and we should see lock gate. This time, the close button should be disabled. Or actually, they should both not be disabled. When we have closed our gate and not locked it, we should be able to both open it and lock it. Those should be options that we have. Yes, so now I want to click on my close button and click on my lock button, and we should expect both of these to be called, because both of these are not going to be disabled. When we go here and we close our gate, we have these two buttons ready to be clicked. Now when I click on them, it doesn't change the state like it does in display. All it does is run the callback function I gave it, which does nothing. And finally, I'm going to do the same thing for the last state that we want to text, which is test, which is closed and locked. I am going to change my prop to be locked, getting the open gate and the unlock gate text. I'm going to expect the close button to be disabled, so to be truthy. And the lock button should be enabled because I should be able to unlock the gate at this point. I should expect my close spy to not be called because it's disabled, and I should expect the lock spy to be called. Now, what I did here with checking both of these on-click things, it's kind of belt and suspenders. I'm already checking to see if these things are disabled. So checking to see if these functions are called when I click on the buttons is kind of redundant because they shouldn't be called because I clicked on the button. this is one of those cases where this could be over-testing, but this could also help some maybe event propagation issues, or, you know, maybe the on-clicks aren't actually set on the buttons, they're set on, like, the button text, or, you know, some weird thing like that. So, don't over-test, don't under-test. It's impossible for me to tell you what either of those things are. All right. So any questions with the tests in this file? I know I went a bit fast at the end, but it's mostly the same, but with slightly different props and text we're searching for. Any questions here before we test display? Jocelyn wants to see closed and unlocked again. Yes. So for closed and unlocked, we're closed but unlocked. We should find the text to open the gate and lock the gate. Neither of these buttons should be disabled, and when we click on each of them, we should expect our SPY functions to be called.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it probably wasn't necessary, but what I also did, I kind of tested those functions in terms of like when you click on the button, I would like change disable to like false, and then I will re-render and see if like the text changes or not. Was that kind of not necessary for these tests?
So for here, what we're doing here is a unit test. We want to test this component in isolation, that it does exactly what it says on the tin. So what our controls component does is it takes in these props, closed and locked, and it uses those to set our button text and whether or not they're disabled. And when we click on our buttons, they run our callback functions. This component controls explicitly does not know the difference between state changing. When we test the different states, we're effectively changing states. You know, in React, we don't mutate our state, we re-render. And re-rendering is calling our component with these new props. So I don't really need to re-render because I'm testing all of the different states one by one. I don't want to rewrite the logic to handle the mutation of my state and re-rendering here, because that's what my dashboard component already does. And I'm not really interested in testing my state mutating logic here. I'm interested in testing the state mutating logic that my users are going to use. So we could absolutely test that here, but that's something that's going to be covered in our integration test when we test dashboard and subsequently test controls, which is hooked into dashboard. And I think that's where we want those tests to live. Okay, so that helps?
Yes. Are we going to go over those integration tests?
Yep, we're going to do it right now.
Too? Okay, great, thanks.
Right. And Jocelyn asked, I saw some people getting elements get by test ID. Is that better, worse? Again, no hard and fast answers here. Where we can, the philosophy of React testing library is to emulate the user experience and test that. So a user does not care about, you know, the test ID on this button, or that this is a button component and not a div styled strangely, or you know, any of these other implementation detailized things. They want to look and see something that says lock gate and click on that. Right? That's what our user wants to do. There's going to be cases, though, where the user experience isn't that easy. We can't just search for the button that says lock gate on it. In that case, getting things by test ID can greatly simplify the logic of like crazy regular expressions to get the exact text we need, or writing text matching functions in the case where our text might be split between like different span or emphasis elements or things like that that the regular expression can't match. So if you can match text, do that. If matching text becomes hard, abandon that. Use get by test ID, but try to use your good judgment. How is your testing going to benefit your experience as a developer on this project and your user's experience to prevent you from destroying that? So you're kind of juggling your productivity in the maintainability of your code base versus, you know, writing tests that more closely match a user's experience in the website. So we can also use query selectors if we want, which, like, you can write a document.query selector in here, and this will search the rendered DOM for the things, but we explicitly don't want to do that because a user does not care if, you know, we have a span with, like, the class, like, something. That's not, that our user's not going to search our website in that way. But if we need to, that option is there. Okay. So, any final questions and controls before we move on to dashboard? All right, cool.
So, and we're
oh no,
sorry.
please.
So we're going to test those toggle functions in dashboard because that's where they live, right?
Yes, yes. And we're not going to do that directly. We're going to do it indirectly by clicking on buttons and seeing what happens. Because we don't care what the implementation of those functions is. We care that when we click the buttons, they change. So we're just going to be testing the effects of these things. So we have our dashboard component. We're rendering our display, and we're giving it our state variables locked and closed. And we're also rendering our controls component, giving it our variables locked and closed, and then also these onClick functions, which we've defined here, which are going to toggle the values of locked and closed respectively. Now let's take a look in that testing file. So again, I'm not going to copy and paste because I want the reps of typing this out. I'm going to import React from React. I'm going to import render from @testing library /React. I'm going to import dashboard from dashboard. And Catherine asked, kind of like the baseball testing project, we're clicking the button so many times displayed X on the screen. Yes, that's exactly what we want to test. And in the baseball project, we tested similarly to the display and button components independently, right? Does the display give, show the text we want on the screen? Does the buttons component, have the buttons click? And even if you didn't write those components, the idea is if you test your whole app, clicking on the buttons and having the test show up, you're testing whatever implementation that you have without worrying about the details. This is our integration test. This is our real user experience test of how the app works. Okay, so I am also going to get my cleanup function, and we might have to do some tricky things with this. So we'll see how this works. So I'm going to make my describe block dashboard, and I want my it renders without crashing, and then here I am going to render dashboard with no props. Just checking to see if it crashes. All right, there we go. Tests are all passing. So now I can start testing my dashboard. So default state, this is going to be unlocked and open, which I've been writing in the other way, so I'm just going to be consistent with open and unlocked. And I know we've gone over time here, but I think this is important, and I'll be finishing relatively soon. So you can always jump out and catch the recording later. So I want to render my dashboard again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my get by text. Again, getting these reps in rather than copy and pasting. And now I want to first verify that we are in open and unlocked. So I'm going to do get by text, and I'm going to look for my regular expression matches exactly open and unlocked, and I'm going to have to look at the website and make sure that that's what we see when we refresh our app. Yep, it's unlocked and open. Great, and that test passes. So now I want to get my buttons, and my buttons are going to say lock gate and close gate. So lock gate and close gate, const close button, and const lock button.
Could you repeat the significance of the $ and up caret?
So there's special characters within my regular expression that are going to match the beginning and the end of a chunk of text, usually a line, but so this makes sure that, because just the string locked, for example, this will match locked. It will also match unlocked. By default, our regular expression is looking for a substring. What I want to do is make sure that I'm getting exactly the word locked and nothing else inside of the text that I'm searching for. So that's what those are doing. So just a little bit of defensive regular expressioning. Okay, so let's see. Oh, I didn't change this back correctly. So those tests should be passing. So now we have our display, our dashboard set up with the initial state, and this is where things get kind of weird, because if I want to, for example, check that clicking on close gate transitions it into this new state, then I can do that here, right? I would just fire a click event on this button and then do some get by text, see if things have changed. But then I want to use this state to then test if I can click on lock and advance its state that way. And I could rewrite a new test that would click close gate and then click lock gate, but that's kind of something I've already did. You can get into a weird situation like this where you want state to carry between your tests, and it can get a bit odd the ways in which you can do that. We can actually move it out of the describe block. This is one way of formatting it. And then I can use the after all function, I believe, with cleanup. And this should run after the first it block runs, and then our describe block runs. And this will prevent our DOM from getting cleared between different tests. So first, let's make sure that that passes. And now I should be able to render my dashboard out here and have this work. Okay, let's see. This is failing. Let's see if I get rid of the cleanup function. I was playing around with this yesterday, but I was using the default dependencies that came with it. And I think the default behavior of React Testing Library has actually changed here. So I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get this to work the way I did yesterday. Oops-a-daisy. So let's see. React Testing Library. Ultimately, we can do this all in one test, and it just reduces our developer ergonomics in terms of being able to identify where the problems went wrong. But if I can figure this out within, just give me 3 minutes, then that would be nice. Ooh, don't clean up after each. That looks like something that I want. Don't clean up. So it looks like cleanup is being set up automatically, but if I import pure, will this give me the behavior that I want? So am I now getting the error that, yes, okay. So it looks like the default behavior of React testing library has changed, and it now cleans up by default. If we import React/pure, then it won't clean up, and I can manually decide when the cleanup occurs, which I'm going to do with this after all function, which is not quite what I want. So I'm going to do the setup that I got working yesterday real fast. So I'm going to put this in a describe block. Do renders without crashing, and this is going to be before each. Let me check real fast. Sorry that this is not the most engaging video. I don't always have as much time to prep these as I would like. Okay. And then this is going to be dashboard. I'm going to call this state transitions. All right, nice, that worked. Okay, so now we can use this same instance of our rendered dashboard between tests. So we're allowing ourselves to carry the state over between tests. So we can name our tests a little bit differently each time. And that's going to help us as we do things. So to briefly go over what I did here is I imported testing library React Pure, which is not going to set up cleanup automatically. I put my renders without crashing in another describe block and set that up to clean up when it was done. And then in a different describe block, I'm going to declare my dashboard up here, and then do all my state transitions where the state of dashboard is kept in between each one of my tests. So the first one, I'm just checking to see that the default state is open and unlocked. I could also check and see if these buttons are disabled or not. Since I already wrote the test for controls, I'm not going to repeat myself here, although I certainly could. So now I want to check open and unlocked to closed and unlocked. So I'm going to get my close button. I'm going to import the fire event function, and I'm going to fire a click event on the close button. And then I'm going to check and make sure that we are in the right stateful world, because at this point, open should now read closed. Unlock should still read unlock, and my buttons check display text. Let's do check button text. So now what I should be seeing is if we go back to our React application, we start out in our initial state, we click close gate, we see unlocked closed here, and then our buttons read lock gate and open gate. So lock gate and open gate. Let's see if this test passes. All right, all of our tests have passed. We were able to transition our state, and so now we're here. We're here. So we're going to keep testing. we're going to keep testing. So I'm going to do one more of these tests, and then I'm going to stop and ask for questions. So I want to transition from closed and unlocked to closed and locked. So I am going to get my lock button, and this should be lock gate, and I'm going to click on the lock button. And then I want to check that my text is closed and locked, and the buttons that I should see are unlock gate and open gate. And let's check and see if that passes. And there we go. All right, so questions here. You all are suspiciously quiet. Quiet because we're good, or quiet because we don't really understand what's going on?
Well, in my case, sorry,
you can go first.
Well, I added much more and had like hard time with that too. And now I'm kind of thinking that was not necessary at all. Like to kind of test all of the functionality, like, you know, with those like just that function is provided. I even added like some things inside so that I can just test the whole functionality of these buttons and change in disabled to not disabled and so on. So that was just kind of too much.
Yeah, so generally if we're testing a pure component, we only need to test that the presentational stuff works. We don't need to test any additional logic with it. When we're doing our integration test, where we're testing our components that render each other and state is involved, this is where we want to test the logic, but we're not going to do that directly. We're going to interact like the user does by clicking on buttons and verifying visually that text has changed or event has fired or something has happened. And so really we don't have to write tests that are too complicated. What I am doing here, remember at the start of this, way back in the beginning, years ago when I started, I said, okay, when we first get this, we want to do our manual testing, right? So I see that we're unlocked and open. I click on close gate, now we're closed. I click on lock gate, now we're closed and locked. I unlock the gate, and I open the gate. This is what we're doing here, right? Literally sequentially. I'm verifying that we're open and unlocked. I'm looking at my buttons. I'm clicking on the button that says closed. I'm checking to see that my state has changed visually, so now I'm closed, and then I can lock and open this gate. And now I'm checking to see if I can lock the gate, and that we are now locked and closed. And I'm going to write, 2 more tests to walk us back up, where we then unlock the gate and open the gate. And I don't have to know how any of that works, so I don't need to test the specifics of those functions. And I could test the disabled properties of my buttons, which that might be a good idea to do here, that like I can't, or I could even not even check the disabled property. I could just try clicking on lock gate and seeing if it works, but I know I wrote the test for that controls component, and that already checked that behavior, so I don't necessarily need to double test myself here. Yeah, so another person had a question. What was your question?
I just wanted to verify that I understand what you did with cleanup. I think what you did is you made it so that you didn't have to repeat yourself with the importing get by text and rendering it. Yeah. Is that right?
Yes, and the problem is I don't mind rendering my component a bunch of times. The issue is that like when I click the close button to make it closed and unlocked, if I want to check the ability to then lock the gate from here, I would have to do that within the same test, because the state normally isn't going to carry across each of the tests for me. So this allows me to break it up into different tests so that when they fail, I can see which one failed, rather than having it in one big test.
I also just wanted to verify, on lines 20 and 21, are you using those or no?
I am not, no. I should be a bit more clear here. I'm just checking to see if those buttons exist with my get by text, which is going to throw the errors for me. So, yeah. All right. Any other questions here?
Yeah, Henry, I mean, if nobody else has a question, I still wanted to quickly run this issue I'm having about mock functions.
Okay.
If you don't mind me sharing my screen.
Before we do that, I'd like to finish this project because we're not quite done yet.
Oh yeah, sure, that's fine.
Yeah, so we've now closed the gate and we have locked the gate, right? We're closed and locked at the end of this test. And also sharing this state between our tasks can cause issues with testing. Generally, we should avoid doing this thing, but if anyone knows a better way to handle this, please tell me, because this is something I don't like doing if I don't have to. So now I want to go from closed and locked to closed and unlocked. So I am going to get my unlock button. I am going to fire my event on that. And then I'm going to verify that I'm closed and unlocked and that my buttons say lock gate and open gate. Okay, so that passed. I should be trying to make these tests fail, but I'm reasonably sure that they're correct, so I'm fine with it. And now, finally, we have unlocked the gate, and we are in the home stretch. I need to open the gate, and we will have made a full trip of our app's state. So, I'm going to go from closed and unlocked to open and unlocked. So I want to get my open gate button. It's going to be my open button. I'm going to click on the open button, and I'm going to verify that I am open and unlocked, and I see the buttons lock gate and close gate. And all of my tests pass. So there's much more that I could test. I could, test that, clicking on open and close gate repeatedly doesn't cause any errors. We can test that, the disabled things don't work. There's always more we can test, but tests take time to write. This was a lengthy process. So we don't always want to test anything exhaustively, because also tests represent how things work now. If I want to change the way this application works purposefully, I have to now rewrite all of my tests. So that you can get into a kind of debt with your tests, where they identify how everything works down to the exact specifics, and sometimes you want to change those specifics. So don't write too many tests. I can't tell you how many is enough or what the correct tests are. You're going to have to feel that one out. So any questions with this project before we wrap it up?
Yeah, a quick one, Henry. Can you just say again why get by text needs that destructuring? It's part of Jest, right? Why do we have to put that in curly braces?
So get by text is not part of Jest, right? When we use get by text, we're searching the React component that we've rendered for text. Jest is not aware of what React components are by default. This is a function that is provided to us as a result of rendering our component. I like destructuring here because it saves on typing, but I could also save this into a variable called dashboard, and then I can do dashboard dot get by text. And those are essentially the same things, because get by text is a member function of dashboard, and when I do destructuring, even though I don't have to literally say dashboard, get by text still refers to dashboard because of the way that this has been bound to dashboard inside of the class definition. So these are both valid ways of doing this, but this get by text explicitly belongs to this instance of this rendered version of my React component. I just don't want to have to type dashboard each time I do this. So I chose to destructure that function out of my object and just use it on its own. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think I misunderstood some of the docs I was reading.
Oh, okay. Great. All right. Any other questions on this project? All right. Well then, thank you all so much for coming. This was a fun one. Testing is fun. Testing is good. I want you all to say it, even if you don't believe it, because working on code bases with tests is so much nicer than doing it without tests. So write good tests, write good comments, write good documentations, and then you will write good code.
Yeah, Henry?
Yep.
Yeah, do you think we could quickly go over this
Yep.
mock thing?
Yep, I just want to wrap up the recording. All right, so thank you everyone so much for coming.